Good afternoon, everyone. You've made it to the end of Youssef, but not quite. We have one more session for you. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Anna. I'm Communications Manager at BPIE, Buildings Performance Institute Europe. We're a leading center of expertise on the energy performance of buildings. Today's session is on the it's a policy session on the social contract, which is an innovative support mechanism designed to assist low-income households to make their homes energy efficient and carbon-free. I'm super excited to have this conversation, and in particular, I think it's a very interesting way to end the 3 days of focus on sustainable energy. I will introduce our panel in a few moments, but before I do that, just to give us a little bit of an introduction to the lay of the land when it comes to energy prices and why financial barriers are something that's very important. I think we all know, and you've probably been discussing for the last few days, how consecutive energy crises are taking their toll. Rising energy prices are placing a lot of financial pressure on a lot of households. Naturally, this is forcing millions of Europeans to choose between often heating or cooling and basic necessities. And I think this is something that we need to bear in mind, that is a year-round vulnerability that we're talking about in terms of energy prices and vulnerable households. I think we're a very funny species, us humans. We're very temperature sensitive, right? It's when something is too hot or too cold, we suddenly become quite vulnerable. And it's both from a personal comfort perspective, but also sometimes very serious health consequences that need to be taken into account. I think resilience to extreme heat and extreme cold, both of which we'll probably be seeing a lot more on a planet that is, victim to climate change, it is a priority for Europeans to have that resilience in their homes, in their offices, schools, all the buildings that we use. Recently, and by recently I mean this spring, BPIE conducted a survey across Europe that found that 25% of Europeans think their homes are not resilient to cold weather. 45% say their homes cannot handle the heat. At the same time, only 35% would move because, of course, we all love our homes and we are intimately connected to them. I think this really shows that renovation and improving the homes that we already live in, that is key. 31% also cite financial constraints as a barrier to improving those homes. And this is something that's going to be the focus of our session today. Low-income households, of course, are particularly affected. Hence why today's policy session talks of a new social contract, delivering a fast and fair decarbonisation for EU buildings. What does that mean? When we talk of renovations, we talk about work usually undertaken by people who are homeowners already. Usually, those homeowners, if they are landlords, pass the costs on to their renters. Residents then face higher living costs and get priced out of newly renovated and energy efficient homes. So, the question that we're looking to answer today with this wonderful panel that I'm about to introduce is how to decarbonize buildings for low-income households without raising those rents, without passing those costs down. The scale of the challenge is great. There are a lot of buildings that need decarbonizing fast to meet the targets set by the Energy Efficiency Directive and the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. So this is now the time to look at alternative financing models that really help us get to those goals quickly and efficiently. Now our session, a bit about what to expect. First, we look a bit at the big picture, what the policy landscape might hold, what technologies we have available, and delving deeper into the concept itself of social contracting. Then, second part, we will be looking at some practical examples and show that this isn't merely a theoretical question, it's something that's already working on the ground. But before we do that, a quick temperature check. A first Slido question, which should be up on everyone's screens at the moment. If you will please scan the QR code. What do you see, our audience, as the biggest barrier to decarbonizing buildings for low-income households? Would it be high upfront investment costs, risk of rent increases, lack of accessible financing models, limited public support incentives, or other? 100% of you currently think it's high upfront investment costs, which I must say bodes quite well for our session. But please do vote, because there are further options. We are okay with the polemic as well. We can disagree. But indeed, I see it's pretty clear. Okay. Someone else says lack of accessible financing models. We've got a few more responses coming through. Probably also people watching online are getting involved. It's very good. But it is clear, I think, that high upfront investment costs do remain the clearest and biggest barrier to decarbonizing buildings. And again, this bodes well, not for Europe, unfortunately, but for our session, because it is a good start to our conversation. I can see some answers getting a bit of competition. See, lack of accessible financing models, limited public support and incentives. And I think to a large extent, our discussion will capture each and every one of these. So I am very glad that people are also voting for some other options. Okay, I think we have a pretty clear winner. And with this, I think finally we can move on to presenting our wonderful panelists. There we go. Our speakers, who are Silvia Rezesi from DG Ener, Andrea Voigt from Danfoss, Rudiger Lohse from EDL Hub, Lorenz Goebel from Thermorent, Josephine van Besseler from EHPA, and Helene Schockert from ResCoop. Each and every one of them will have their own presentation, so you'll hear about them more in a second. And for now, I would like to invite our first speaker, Silvia, to give us a quick rundown of what the policy space has in store. Silvia is a policy officer at the Directorate General for Energy at the European Commission. She's been working in the domain of energy performance of buildings, including building renovation and clean heating and cooling in buildings. So take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Is the mic working?
It is.
Everyone can hear?
Yeah?
Perfect.
Okay,
wonderful.
Very good. So thank you for your perseverance and interest in this really wonderful session. I hope we will live up to the expectations and your perseverance to be here at the end of day 3, which is the best day. What I wanted to start with is a quick reminder. When we talk about buildings policy, especially when we're among like-minded, it's easy to get lost in technical jargon. We talk about zero-emission buildings, about global warming potential metrics, about trajectories, about minimum energy performance standards. But I would really suggest that we never forget about what the true purpose of buildings policy is, and it's about making the spaces we live better. It's about making the spaces and places where we share for work, for fun, for study, making them better. It's about health, comfort, and human dignity. And this is to say that building decarbonization policy has actually moved beyond being a single policy goal. It's 4 imperatives together. It's energy security, it's competitiveness, it's affordability and social justice, and it's also decarbonization. And these are not competing priorities, but they reinforce each other. And I think we should really not forget this. And to achieve those priorities, the European energy legislation framework the European energy legislation sets a comprehensive framework through various provisions in various legislative acts. Maybe if you allow me to spend a moment on zooming into the topic of decarbonization of heating through different, let's say, take you on a joyride through different legislative provisions, including in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, for instance. We have provisions that say that already since the beginning of last year, member states cannot provide financial incentives for standalone boilers. Our legislation, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, provides a legal basis for national bans of fossil fuel boilers under certain conditions. It also steers member states to plan policies and measures in the context of their national building renovation plans with a view to a complete phase out of fossil fuel boilers by 2040. It has supportive provisions on zero-emission buildings. It has supportive provisions in the context of what is recommended to the final user via energy performance certificates. It gives, for instance, also possibilities for recommendation for promoting low-temperature heating via minimum energy performance requirements. Then we have the Renewable Energy Directive, and there are the headline targets, but also sectoral targets for the penetration of renewables in the building sector, in heating and cooling, and other important provisions such as the recognition of renewable plants as overriding public interest with important implications on connecting to the grid, as well as on integration of geothermal and solar thermal in district heating. And also maybe this is not necessarily so often visible for people working on buildings policy, but important provisions on grid planning and investment decisions by TSOs and DSOs that are to recognize the balancing and other system services provided by district heating. And this is all important because it feeds into the consumer proposition and can improve the consumer proposition for the upfront costs of clean heat technologies. Then we have the Energy Efficiency Directive with local heating and cooling plants, which are a powerful tool for connecting the dots at local level while things really happen, and the progressive evolution of efficient district heating systems, and as well as comprehensive heating and cooling assessments as part of the national energy and climate plans. We have also the eco-design and energy labeling, which are really ensuring that the products that we get on the market and the information that reaches the consumer well, the products are good, respond to the requirements, and the information is useful and informative for the consumer to take the right decision. And then we have important provisions in the electricity market legislation, the electricity directive, the electricity regulation, the electricity market design that really puts the consumer in the center through dynamic contracts, through the right to separate supply contracts for heat pumps, so also allowing flexibility that can and will build in the consumer proposition on the CapEx side and on the OpEx, the operation, also the heating side. And so this is about the policy framework. But then I would just take a moment to remind that EU funding for energy efficiency in this budgetary period, so the period 2021-2027. Was 145 billion for energy efficiency in general, cohesion funds, recovery and resilience, and so on, which is really, it's unprecedented. It has been, we have seen a manifold increase on the previous period, to be precise, 8-fold increase. And in this context, about 80 billion euro went from the Recovery and Resilience Fund, so from the post-COVID recovery fund, went to buildings, to renovating buildings. However, with this in mind, the investment challenge is still there. I just read a couple of days ago a very comprehensive report on clean energy investments that shows that in 2025, 112 billion euros were invested in energy renovation and heat pump deployment, public and private money, obviously. But still, the gap is more or less at the same size. So we're looking into ways to maximize the impact of public funding, and we're looking into ways of really unleashing financing schemes that are adapted to existing buildings. And I will close with a really kind of also maybe an opening or a food for thought for our panel. We need to succeed, we must be honest about the challenges the citizens face in building renovation. So what are the structural barriers behind this? Is it a lack of solvency, so where a low-income homeowner simply does not have the financial capacity? Is it a lack of liquidity, where capital is missing now in the short term, but where long-term savings materialized, or is it competing priorities? And what about the split incentive dilemma in rented properties? And I think that we do have good examples of solving all those. Thank you, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. I will invite you to join us back here. Thank you very much. So as you've heard, we have, unprecedented funding for energy efficiency. We have a need to talk about structural barriers faced by those who are on the front line of delivering these renovations. And now I would like to introduce our second speaker, and Andrea, receive the clicker of power. Yeah, the clicker of power. Andrea is Vice President, Public Affairs and Sustainability at Danfoss. Mic is working, the technology is functional, very good. Danfoss is a global leader in energy efficiency and decarbonisation technologies. Andrea has been with Danfoss since 2021, but her experience in heating and cooling spans over 2 decades. So I think you're going to give us quite a comprehensive overview of the kinds of heat that we could be expected to tap into. So please take it away. The floor is yours.
Right. Thanks a lot, Anna, and thanks for the nice introduction. And very happy to be here and to see that quite a few people made it until the end of the USEF. So that's pretty cool. And what you were saying in the beginning, that we are a strange species and very sensitive to temperature, I can certainly say that for me because it's super hot here. So. So yeah, definitely a proof point here.
Indeed, especially if anyone is in the room.
Exactly.
They feel the same, yeah.
So I was wondering, what am I going to talk about? Because there is obviously a lot of different technologies on what we can do in order to make heating or decarbonization of heating competitive, and to make sure that we can address those split incentives, which I think are one of the key barriers that we are facing. I remember an event that we organized in my previous job like 15 years ago here in Brussels, and then already we were speaking about the split incentive, and it still hasn't been solved. So I think, we have a good opportunity to hear more here today about social contracts and social leasing with various technologies. But then, I was wondering which technology am I going to talk about here? And then in the end, I thought, well, I'm not going to go into detail on different technologies, but rather show the beauty of an integrated energy system. And without going into detail of this very complex looking circle here, which my engineering colleagues have put together, very concerned that we show really all the interactions. I think what comes across quite clearly is that the cooling, the heating, and the electricity grid are pretty closely connected, and that there are a lot of interactions between those grids that are not necessarily being used off to their full extent. So if you take, for example, a supermarket would need cooling. That cooling produces waste heat, as everybody would feel when you put your hand behind a fridge or anything, or a motor. That heat generally is blown out in the air. It can be used, it can be fed into the red circle here, into the heating grid, and then you don't need to generate that heat for the heating grid because it's already there. So that's one opportunity. Then if you look, for example, at a heat pump, people first thing they think about is that the heat pump is going to heat, but a heat pump can also cool. For that, it needs electricity. So again, you have an interaction between the three grids, and you could give many examples around that circle that shows that interaction, where you need electricity on the one hand side, you have a need for heat, maybe you have a need for cooling, and you have those interaction. a heat pump, for example, can then also play an important role if you recover the heat from a cooling application or from an industrial process. Maybe that heat doesn't have the right temperature. You can use the heat pump to bring it to the right temperature. For that, the heat pump needs electricity, so there it then connects again. So a lot of opportunities here, and those opportunities are not being used, and I really have high hopes on the heating and cooling strategy and on the electrification action plan, that those interactions will be somehow being taken into account in that framework. You were mentioning so many different pieces of legislation, Silvia, and I think that's, on the one hand side, it's good because it drives a lot of change. On the other hand side, it's a very complex landscape for those who have to comply with it. So I think we have a good opportunity here to connect some dots, as you were saying, and to connect those dots also in the energy system. So if you look here, that's just taking it a little bit more down to the detailed level, again, on the interactions between those different energy consumers and energy providers. You look at the buildings, you can, of course, increase the energy efficiency of the buildings, and I see Gust sitting here in the first row. So there we have a lot of opportunities also with controls, with bugs, for example, where a lot can be done very fast and with very short payback times. Then, as I was saying already, you have the heat pumps, but then you have also district energy, of course. All of this can be linked to each other. And with all of this linking to each other, we can save a lot of money and a lot of energy. We can also create a lot of flexibility, which is increasingly being needed when we phase in renewables into the system more and more. And at the end of the day, the society is benefiting as a whole, I would say. So a little bit of a nitty-gritty technical detail here, but I think it's a really interesting one. It shows actually how important also controls are, and it also shows the beauty of waste heat once again, because basically the efficiency depends a lot on of a heat pump depends a lot on the work that is being done by the compressor. The more work the compressor has to do, the more energy is of course being consumed. So therefore you have an interest to reduce that temperature lift. So if you have a very stable temperature for the heat pump, then that temperature lift can be better controlled, and then the heat pump is much more efficient. So that's what you see on the graph, where the blue line is the efficiency, and the red line is the lift, and then you see how these two correlate with each other. So there is a real opportunity if we can master that temperature lift and make it as small as possible, so reduce the work of the compressor as much as possible, then the efficiency increases of the heat pump. And then this is a practical example here of a little town, or I should not say, I was told I should not say it's a little town, so it's a town in Denmark, which is called Sonneborg, which is very close to the Danfoss headquarters, and where we have really put into practice this integrated energy grid, where everything is kind of linked to each other, and where we apply this principle of reducing the energy use with various opportunities in terms of energy efficiency, where we then reuse the energy, so what I was explaining earlier in terms of the waste heat, for example, and where we then use renewables for the rest of the energy needs. And in Sonneborg, there is this commitment in a project which is called Project Zero, where the city of Sonneborg has committed to become carbon neutral in their energy system by 2029. And so they are very well on their way to achieving that target and of working together in terms of really getting there. And it also shows the necessity of working together and not in isolation, which I think is something we see unfortunately not enough, and which also explains partly the split incentive, actually, because people don't see the entire system. So this is a nice example on how we can achieve decarbonisation and how we can move towards an affordable and a decarbonised energy system for society and for everyone. And I should say that and that's not even on this graph here, that now there is even a tangible example of a data center there where the heat can be recovered from the data center and is used directly in the heating grid, in the district energy grid. So a lot of good things coming out from there, and tangible examples that it can be done. So I think we have a good opportunity here now to hear from my fellow speakers on the panel on what are the framework conditions in order to achieve that, and what are the specific opportunities we have for heat pumps with social contracts and for the energy communities around. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, and absolutely, and it shows how cities can be such interesting places, right? Because you have such concentration of people who are, or in institutions or buildings that are giving off heat, and then others that need heat. So you can really optimize the system in a very interesting way. Thank you very much for that overview. And I liked what you said about the beauty of waste heat. I think I'm going to, we rarely describe it that way, so I think I might steal that from now on. To quickly move on to an introduction of our central concept, the social contracting and social leasing, I will now introduce our third speaker, Rudiger Lohse, who is Managing Director of the DENEF ETL Hub. If you can pass the clicker of power, it is making its way to you. Yes, fantastic. You have the controls. Rudiger is co-founder and managing director of the ESCO Hub in Germany, the leading political and market association for energy service companies since 2020. Rudiger, the floor is yours.
And the clock is already ticking. Wonderful. Yeah, great to be here, and thank you for your patience. To stay here and not go out and enjoy the sun would also be an option. But you stayed here, so let's make something good out of it. Just a few words, just looking into the practice part of everything when we talk about decarbonizing heating systems and decarbonizing building stock in total. So what we see, basically what will happen is, of course, that we have a discussion, not only on the legal level, on the legislative level in Germany right now, but we have a fierce discussion on what, how, and especially on the costs. And when it comes to housing companies, which are very important to convince and bring on your side, then it's always the same spelling. You hear, okay, we have the split incentive. Why should we as owners do something on our buildings? Because you know what? If you do something, and I was amazed to see that it was not tagged here in this polling before we started. We had no increase of the renting rate, but that is basically the fear of those 22% in, at least in Germany and other Central European countries, a bit less, but those are the tenants not able to afford any kind of lifting the threshold of your monthly rental rate. So that's the point of the discussion where we are. It's not only Germany, it's also in France in a different way, it's in Sweden and also in a different way, that people look at it and say, okay, we will have to pay more. Some of them are really relaxed because they, okay, I don't care about 50 cents per square meter a month. It's not much for me. But at least 22% cannot. And those are leading discussion right now, and it's good. We need to focus that. We need to focus. If we lose 22%, we do something wrong. So we thought about how we get them involved. And of course, you can imagine what will happen right now. So what is the concept? If you're on the lucky side, you have placed yourself in the first row, so where we laid out this one. But of course, you can approach us anytime. It's very simple. We can explain it here very shortly. So the idea is that a landlord who is looking at his tenants, could be a cooperative housing company, could be a municipal housing company, could be also a commercial housing company, looking at, okay, I don't want to gentrify my area by refurbishing it, pushing out those tenants who cannot afford this. 80% may, but 20% may not. So I don't want to get in this situation, so I have the opportunity to get into this social contract. The social contract has two components. First of it, You need not invest by yourself. Somebody is doing it for you. It could be your municipal utility. It could be an ESCO. It could be just a quite normal ESCO. It could also be a cooperative ESCO where you have, we have those different ways of playing ESCO business here in Europe. So it could be anybody who is doing the first investment. So, okay, as a landlord, not able to finance this all, you get some burden off your shoulders, right? First step's good, feels good. And then you go next step and say, okay, I'm in the lower level, in the lower quartile of the average rental rate. So this is the focus we are focusing in. So we don't want to have the high level rent rates, but we look into those 24% of the lowest average rental rate. And those are able to apply in a subsidy system. So here comes the incentive into the game, into a subsidy system which gives you one investment support in a time and forces you in this way to stay stable with your rental rate over the next 10 or 15 years with regard of the refurbishment you made. Sounds complicated, it's very easy. So you just get what is not cost neutral, you just get this on. And if you have those ideas basically here on stage, you have a very simple concept. You have costs, and I just move on. You have the additional costs. So the cost will raise through the investment maybe in a heat pump. It could cost a bit more because the first investment is higher. So you will have to raise your rental rate. But then on the next step, you get the support to just lower it and flatten it down to the level that it's still affordable and it's cost neutral in a way. And so that's the basic idea. So it's very simple. It's very straightforward, to put it this way, to just make it clear it's not rocket science. It's just a dedicated subsidy for somebody who thinks of his tenants and does not want or cannot afford to move them out of the housing situation he is in. So that's pretty simple. We are on the way. I'm just clicking here around here. So we're back and forth, but we are on the way. We are on a very good way right now. So we have this discussion led in the past 2 years because it was something not filled in our policy discussion and in our practical discussion in Germany, in Berlin especially. And we are very glad to have this right now. And we are now moving into the situation that we can prepare a first draft for the regulation and for the subsidy tool, just in the write-down that the Department of Energy is able to integrate it or may be able to integrate it into their subsidy tools. So one last point, which is important. Why ESCOs or why utilities? And why should we relate this to this target group especially? If you look at those 22 or 20% with low incomes, we usually see them in bad housing situations, and they're usually not well trained into using energy, open windows, this and that. I don't need to dive deeper into that. The role of the ESCO or utility then would be not only to take the first invest, but also look on the consumption. Because they do anyway. They have to do it anyway. And that's the difference to different other types of financing tools. So we have a partner in who is used to and experienced to look at the consumptions also, and especially for consumers who may step into higher risks, higher cost risks when they do not care about their energy consumption. And that's the whole idea. So happy to discuss it with you, and let's see how we move on. And we already have one case where a responsible ESCO is working on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. So I think this is a very first stab at giving the lay of the land, which we can all see is pretty complex. So you have a central policy landscape that is trying to enable the phase out of fossil fuels from buildings, providing funding, but making sure that kind of that security, competitiveness, and decarbonisation are not competing goals. So we have that sort of sitting centrally. Then we have the possibility, at least, to really make cities work in a sort of circular way, right? To try and use as much of that heat as possible. The old adage is the cheapest energy is the one we don't use. Maybe the most beautiful heat is the one you already have, you're already producing. So we have a lot of interesting things to contend with here in terms of the practicalities. Then again, we're talking about the role of utilities, right? And trying to minimize that risk for owners, trying to stop that gentrification from happening, trying to provide that education piece as well. So not just kind of having the classic role of providing the energy, but also getting more involved, right? So an interesting system, many actors. We've just taken one first stab at describing those. And that is sort of the first part of our conversation today. We're not done yet, don't leave. What we want to do at this point is another temperature check. Please, someone appreciate my puns. This second temperature check is, I suppose, to see that after we've had all these conversations, where our audience feels the burden should lie. So this is another Slido question. If you will follow the instructions on the screen, and please answer the following question. Who should bear the largest share of renovation costs? As we know, most people think that that is a huge, but wow, well, we already have very enthusiastic answers. As we know, cost is a huge barrier no matter where it sits. But is it property owners, shared responsibility, public authorities, energy service companies or utilities, or tenants? As a surprise to no one, tenants is currently at 0%, but we do have a race between the idea of shared responsibility, property owners, public authorities, and energy service companies. I can see the top two answers are sort of moving, right? But there is a clear sense that this doesn't just sit in one actor's remit. And I think that's, I suppose, the key takeaway here. Whether you think it sits with property owners, energy service companies, who is actually climbing in the tops at the moment, public authorities, property owners, or a shared responsibility, whether that's equally or not amongst all these actors, there is clearly a complex system here that needs to be accounted for. And I think you will see in a second, as we move to the second part of our conversation today, there are people who are trying to tackle this in a very practical way on the ground. So without further ado, I will introduce our next speaker. Lorenz Goebel comes from Thermorent in Germany. Lorenz represents the third generation of a family-owned business. 40 years ago, one of the first companies in Germany, that's amazing, to introduce the business model of a professional heat supply. And this is a company that really has a finger on the pulse, I suppose, because we're talking about buildings that already exist, buildings that are not always energy efficient, so you really know what is going on. Do you have the clicker of power is the real question.
I have it. Hello? Yeah.
Perfect. Take it away, Lorenz.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I was a bit worried at first when I saw that poll because energy service provider was going up there, but so now you clicked shared responsibilities. That's good for us, I think. So as Anna mentioned, we are a family-owned heat supplier from Germany. We are based in South Germany, but we're working all around in Germany. We're doing everything in our company. So we have the installers, we have engineers, and we do the administration as well. As you all know, and as Rüdiger mentioned, the heat prices are under pressure at the moment, especially in those unrenovated buildings we are working in. So every heat pump and those renewables are more expensive at the moment. We have a volatile energy market in the last few years, and those vulnerable households in those existing buildings cannot absorb those additional costs. That's why I brought you an example of a heat plant we are operating near Fürth, that's close to Nuremberg, where we will implement some renewable energy and where we try to keep the heat price affordable for those tenants. There are currently 560 households connected to this heat plant. There are housing blocks and family houses, all built in the 1960s, as you can see on the picture on the right side. There are 2 gas boilers and 1 CHP, so combined heat and power unit, as generators working. The current situation is that we have an outdated heat plant. There are old buildings. We have central hot water system. The old heaters, they lead to high system temperatures. And it, as I mentioned, the heat price must remain affordable for those low-income tenants. Our target scenario is to reduce the gas input we have there by installing high-temperature heat pumps. They will mostly be powered by the self-generated electricity, but also can be generated by the electricity from the grid. It should be cost-neutral for users, otherwise the landlords wouldn't agree with those additional installments we want to do there. And we try to do that in a modular design so that we can continuously increase the share of the renewables there. We try to do that very transparent to the landlords and the users as well, and affordable, of course. So I brought 2 thoughts how we will accomplish that. With those new heat pumps, we have now the situation that we have a multiple fuel heat plant, so electricity and gas. And the usual way to price your heating is to do it on pre-calculated shares, which fuel will be used how much. The problem is with some changed operating conditions, like, for example, the outside temperature, the market shifts, I don't know, they lead to that results in a heat price that isn't reflecting the production costs anymore. So, for example, if the electricity price drops, as an operator, it's now very effective to use your heat pump in much colder conditions. And now this heat price isn't reflecting your actual production costs anymore. That will lead to high margin, or could possibly lead to high losses for the plant provider as well. But usually it would be marginal because we can decide, okay, now the gas boiler is working, now the heat pump should generate the heat, and it will lead to unjustified pricing for users. So instead of those pre-calculated shares, we recommend doing it on the based on the actual energy consumption. So now, of course, the heat price is reflecting the production costs. And now with those economic decisions we're doing as a plant operator, they will benefit the users instead of our margin. And the next thought is pretty similar. Because of in the heat supply, we have very long-term contracts, about 10 to 15 years. So you need to couple your cost to some kind of energy market. Usually it's done by coupling it to the gas price index. That's the orange line you see on the graph. The problem is every so-called contractor or heat supplier is buying their gas years up front, like 3 to 4 years up front. So you have your gas price fixed for the next few years. That's the blue line you see there. When the energy market is quite stable, that's not a big problem because the price is stable, the heat price will be the same. But for example, in the year 2020, we had a spike in the gas price index, as you can see, and that now leads to high margin for every heat distributor. And I think that's, for us, it's of course a nice thing, but that's not part of our business. We want to deliver heat, not speculate on the energy market. So we instead recommend to recommend to couple it to your actual costs, not to your index, so that you don't have to have margins on the back of the consumers there. That leads us to the conclusions. With those cost coupling and those long-term procurements, we can have a stable price for the users, for the tenants. Both examples, I think, are very transparent. So as a user, as landlord, you see which generator we're using. Is it now much more the heat pump? Is it the gas boiler? And we have aligned interests with that. So if we are planning right and operate our heat plant efficient, that will benefit the users instead of our margins, and all those buffers, risk buffers removed, will lead to lower costs for the users. So there were just a few examples from the heat distribution practice Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well. And then I like to see that echo of centering the consumer, right? Because you're trying to use the levers available to you to lower the costs for the end user, which is kind of an echo of the policy space that we were talking about earlier as well. Thank you very much, Lawrence. Moving on very quickly to another stakeholder perspective, let's hear from the heat pump sector. It is my pleasure to introduce Josephine van Besseler, who is Policy Director at the European Heat Pump Association. And she oversees the policy team and overlooking different files and advocacy for the organization. And take it away, Josephine.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you also to the other speakers. After having a very, deep dive and a very concrete case, I will zoom out a little bit again and look at how we, from the heat pump sector, look at this challenge of decarbonizing, putting in clean heating systems, but also getting everyone along. So if we look at the current heat pump market, we see that the total heat pump stock is 28 million in 2025. 2.6 million of those heat pumps were sold last year. You would say, okay, that's a pretty big number. But if we then zoom out and look at the total households and how are they heated, we see that only 13 to 15% of European households are actually using a heat pump today. And in the sales of 2025 of all heating systems, we see that heat pumps were only 33%. So again, even if that looks like a big number, it's really a small share, and we see still that the largest share of heating systems that are being sold are still fossil fuel boilers. So it's very, very clear we need to scale up, we need to accelerate, not only to achieve our climate neutrality, no, we don't need to go there yet, sorry. Okay, yes, so we need to accelerate to achieve our energy and climate targets, and also, as has become clear again in the previous months, to achieve our more energy security. The European Commission has pointed out very clearly in the Accelerate EU document, really clearly that electrification is the way forward to provide more energy security and to move away from this dependence on fossil fuel imports from unreliable partners. So we need to accelerate, but why are we not accelerating fast enough? Why are there not many more heat pumps if we know of their benefits and that they are much more efficient, for example, than fossil fuel boilers? Well, the biggest barrier is costs. It's not really a surprise, I think, but we are doing, together with Vito and Fraunhofer, a heat pump accelerator platform project for the European Commission. It's a 3-year project, and at the start of this project, so we are gathering more than 80 stakeholders there, really a broad group from people involved in the grids, financing people, but also people from the heat pump sector, from different organizations and so on. And it's really unanimously the main issue to address is the costs. If you look at heat pump costs, you see the different aspects. So heat pump costs consist of the upfront costs and of the operating costs. So when you shift from a gas boiler to a heat pump, the idea would be that you shift from something with a low capex and a high opex to something with a high capex and a low opex. But I think we all know that in reality, this is not the case, because the operating costs for fossil fuels are artificially low, and the operating costs of electricity is very high in many countries, because there's a lot of taxes and levies, for example, put on the electricity price. So what we need to address to improve this is this famous electricity to gas price ratio. We need to shift away taxes and levies from the electricity bill to, for example, the fossil fuel bill. We also need to look at using heat pumps much more flexibly and getting rewarded for that. We need to look at indeed using this waste heat with large heat pumps from industry and so on, but also smaller heat pumps from, for example, ventilation systems in the households, these exhaust air heat pumps, for example. So there's many ways to improve this operating cost. Then, of course, we also need to look at the capex, at the upfront cost, because yes, the upfront costs for heat pumps are higher than for fossil fuel boilers. But also a caveat there, there's not just one heat pump upfront cost. There's many types of heat pumps, many sizes of heat pumps. So for example, a small air-to-air heat pump in an apartment in Southern Europe could cost below 4,000 or 3,000 euros, whereas a ground source heat pump in Germany, for example, could cost above 60,000 euros. So you see there's a huge variety. So that's also, if we talk about heat pump costs, there's not just one, it's very wide. So if we look at that CapEx, that consists also of different elements of the unit price, of the installation price, and then also a number of national legislative requirements, for example, certain permits you need to have, and so on. So it is very interesting for our sector to look into how can we bring down those costs and how can we bring down those upfront costs also in specific. And at the European Heat Pump Association, we have been looking into social leasing, which is a bit related to this social contract. So social leasing for heat pumps is actually where you divide this once, how do you say, the payment that you would do once for the upfront costs, you divide it into monthly fees, and you have it backed by a public guarantee, and you have also subsidies coming in. So that helps to make this upfront cost more affordable. And it also helps in the decision complexity because you also have this service provider coming in and helping you. But of course, there we also in the previous panel on the other side of the corridor, we're discussing also a similar topic, and also there was Eva from FEANSA, and she was also bringing in that this is also difficult for really the lowest group of the lowest income groups in society. For them, even these monthly payments, which you would have with a social leasing scheme, even that is too high for them. And then I think this social contract scheme is very interesting because it looks really at the most vulnerable in society, I think, to really make it affordable for them as well. It doesn't go out from the principle, okay, we need to make this upfront cost manageable. No, it looks at how do we really make it affordable to live, to rent as a whole. So it's more this societal goal, I think. So that's very important to look into. I also put on the slide the French example. So in France, they are looking into putting social leasing for heat pumps in place. Apparently, it would start in October 2026. Let's see. So there, the aim would be to have a monthly cost that is lower than the gas bill. Also there, we don't know a lot of details yet, but it's good to have at least one example that is apparently being put into place. I'm very cautious. So that we could see and learn from that and also replicate in other countries. But again, I think we need leasing, we need social leasing, we need social contracting, because between those 13 to 15% that are currently using heat pumps, that's not at all yet all the high and middle income households. So we can tackle these with the different types of leasing schemes, but then the really most vulnerable, lowest income households, there I think this social contracting is a very important scheme as well to have a complete set of tools to use.
A complete set of tools. That is a brilliant way to drive the point home, because I think you've described, just in your short intervention, you've described different types of difficulties and barriers and different kinds of consumers that we're looking at in the energy market. So I think for each a tool to get clean heat into their homes, and in particular as lower income households live in the least energy efficient buildings, that is something that is targeted to them, is something very important, I think. This is very, very interesting, and I think I'd like to move very quickly on to our next speaker, just to have a look at the potential for collective action and collective solutions in terms of clean heat. I think now we move on to Helene Schockert, who is a senior expert in energy poverty at Rescoop. And Helene works on exploring how energy communities tackle energy poverty with a focus on improving their social impact and their inclusiveness. You don't need a clicker of power, but do you have everything you need? The floor is yours.
I will try to make it work with the power of my words.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I didn't bring a presentation because I also wanted to kind of improvise to what other speakers were saying, as I'm the last speaker, so I have that privilege. But yeah, I wanted to react to the idea of social contracting. I really like it. It puts the social aspect front and center. Although with so many things that have this social aspect or this social adjective in front of it, I'm thinking like, okay, but yeah, let's think about the social economy, social policy, social welfare. So the question that I want to ask is, does that mean that the economy, like mainstream economy, is then not social by definition? So yeah, for me, this is always like a little bit of a double-edged sword. Like we want to raise attention to the social aspects and we highlight the social economy, but then I'm also thinking like, yeah, but then there's also this other economy, which is by definition not social then. So if this is the case, and I do think it is, then we should seriously question the viability of our mainstream economic model to deal with the current issues that we face as human beings, as the weird species that we are, which is climate change, rising inequality, skyrocketing energy prices, and increasing living costs. And I was very inspired by this. I also mentioned it in the session yesterday, also at the end of the day. Was like the same vibe. People were getting tired, but still they showed up. And I was very inspired by this opinion piece that was just published yesterday by some great names in economics. Jason Hickel, Kate Raworth, and they're really questioning the whether or not we can still rely on the growth model as it is, and they are saying the answer is no. And I really want to support them in that message. Also speaking from a energy communities perspective, I do really think that the way that we design our economies and the way that we design the policies around that are having the social aspects more as an afterthought instead of putting it front and center. Like, it's nice to have these conversations, but there's a lot of, like, we're in a pretty small room when it comes to European Sustainable Energy Week. So yeah, I think there's still a long way to go of putting the social aspect back where it belongs and not having to name it as such anymore. Like, we shouldn't call it a social economy. It should just be the economy. And energy communities are the only way of, like, the only formally recognized way of collectively governing the energy system. And I think there's a lot of potential there to meet some of the challenges that we're currently facing. And even though that there's a lot of examples that are still in the experimental phase, like also the current project that I'm working on, Social Energy, it's a lot of experimentation and there's a lot of challenges and barriers, but there's also so much potential in these models to take the most vulnerable along from the very beginning, from the get-go, and not just as an afterthought, as I said. And what I also want to highlight is that these models, these energy communities, these cooperative models are centered around values of community care, around democratic governance through one member, one vote, and about cooperation. We see that energy communities, we had our forum 2 weeks ago, and it's like everybody's just sharing knowledge amongst each other. There's nobody there that is trying to sneakily improve his or her business model and keeping secrets from someone else, or no, there's really no competition there. And it really creates like this shared vision for the future and this shared feeling of responsibility. And also this shared realization that, yes, we are energy communities and we want to be this democratic, inclusive movement, but there's still a long way to go for us as well. Like, we don't really reach vulnerable households yet to the extent that we would like to. Even though that there's some great initiatives already out there, and I want to mention a couple of those to highlight the potential of community energy in this regard. For example, there's the initiatives that set up solidarity funds where you have the more affluent members of a community pay for the investment costs of people that are not able to afford participating in the energy transition just by themselves. So you have that collective approach of solidarity and redistribution of resources within a local community. Then you have, I was in North Macedonia last week, and there was one of our members that shared a great story. There's really like this demographic issue of, that we see in a lot of European member states, where people are just leaving the countryside, going to the big cities, and then in Eastern Europe, from those big cities, they go to Western Europe or America or whatever, wherever they think that there's more economic prospects for them. But they said like, okay, let's install some solar panels on a school building, and then with the revenues they were able to do some community projects. And actually they saw that people started to come back to that town and started to see some future there and some potential of economic development and of doing something collectively again and of really taking care of it themselves and taking charge of their own future again. So that was a really like inspiring story that I learned about last week. But then there's also like one of the examples in to talk about heating and renovations and bringing renewable energy into social housing, for example. There's also one of our Belgian members, Kliman, who's cooperating with a housing provider, Woonland, and they have installed solar panels on 197 social housing units in the Otterbeek district in Mechelen. And now they are consuming solar energy or just electricity at prices that are even lower than the publicly subsidized price that social tenants usually paid for their electricity. I would like to share a lot more examples, but I don't have time for that. I'm already in rut. But I'm glad to see that the paper, like the covered promotion that I did yesterday, is still there. So if you want to scan that QR code, we have a lot more examples in the reports that sits behind that QR code and a lot of policy recommendations as well. So I leave it there.
Scan that QR code before I direct your attention to a new one. Thank you very much, Helene. I think it's really wonderful what you've just shared, because it gives a real sense of the fact that our communities are powered by energy. Typically, this has been cheap fossil fuels, but once you wake people up to changing the model, you can really recreate communities. You can reimagine a lot of models. You can even turn the tide, as it were, on what you thought the migration trend looked like away from cities. It's really quite incredible. So thank you very much for I suppose showing us what kind of future is possible if you really reimagine models of consuming energy. My last temperature check for the audience. I think we've had our speakers whiz you through a lot of different concepts, a lot of interesting content. If you've taken this all in, this is another Slido question that I would like to put to the audience. Thank you very much, team. That should be on the screen now. Do you think that the social contract model can work at scale? Having heard what you've heard today, how things can be reimagined, I see yeses and maybes, and I see 0 no's, which is, I think, very hopeful for all of us today on the panel. This is very good. The room is split into yes and maybes. Okay, maybes are winning. A few yeses are also coming up. The no's are starting to come in. So there is a small minority, perhaps we haven't managed to convince quite yet, but we do still have half an hour, so we will try our best. But online, everyone can see us, so it's not a question of just closing the doors. Who knows? We have an infinite audience, potentially. No, but it is clear that it is a very interesting concept. It's a very applicable concept, and in particular, it captures a part of the market that can be overlooked. Like Helene was saying, we almost should make the social side be there by default, right? And I think this is one way of capturing that if you have it as a present instrument in the business model of many ESCOs. the maybes are winning, I must say, but that is still pretty positive. And the maybes and the yeses are at the top. So thank you to everyone in the audience who has participated in this and who has let us know their views. I will also take the opportunity now just to say that at the very end, you'll be able to ask questions through the Q&A function, and we will be asking those to our panelists in a dedicated session. But thank you very much for, until now, answering our questions very, very enthusiastically. Same question, but now directed to our panelists. And this is what I would like to hear from them now. Of course, being here, they're all relatively convinced of the merits of the concept, of course. But I think it is still interesting to hear from each of you if you think that this model can work at scale now. And perhaps if you had a caveat or something that you think would be needed to make it work at scale if it's currently not ready for rollout across the member states. I will start in the order of our speakers. So Sylvia, I will first turn to you. Do you think the social contract model can work at scale?
Yeah, thank you. I remember I first got to understand what energy performance contracting is about 25 years ago. It was, at the time, at least, I found it very exciting, new, at least for me, concept. And I think that it has rolled out nicely in the EU. I'm not familiar whether it has really managed to reach levels of deep renovation or it has focused really on quick payback and limited technical risk items. But yeah, so I would like to hear the other panelists on this as well. But I think that the concept of socializing energy performance contract is fantastic. I think it has a good potential as long as, well, I see two items, two nuts to crack, if you want. The first is, my understanding is that somebody has to underwrite this through a guarantee or through a financial instrument. And this is something that has been done in different contexts in the past as well. So I see that there are good lessons to be learned and examples to be deployed in the context of a social contracting, including through public-private partnerships, including through guarantees by state or other public guarantees, and so on. The other question I see, and I think it's a little bit, it's not maybe specifically about social contracting, but it's even more valid there. I mean, for building renovation, we don't have a technical problem. We have the technologies. We don't necessarily have a financial problem. There is money around there. I think it's really about getting everyone together. I mean, it's really about connecting the dots of different people involved in this journey. And I think that this is really super promising on what the social contracting is offering, really to bring together the technical expertise, the financial expertise, the consumer, and the wider society, because it's in the interest of all of us to get our buildings right, if you want. And I would also be interested to hear the views of the other co-panelists on how to do such market facility, or how to advance. Is it through market facilitation to deploy social contracting? Is it through aggregating such contracts? Is it through public-private partnerships? Is it through bundling different client profiles? Is it through combining social contracting with grants, or is it simply by allowing this to be off balance sheet, because this is also an issue for the public sector. And I know that kind of everyone knows that there are good examples out there. So what can be replicated, what possibly the Commission can do, how to bring in if I may use the sleeping giants, utilities, the public sector, or the waking up giants. The construction companies also, so how to really put all those stakeholders together. Maybe I use the opportunity to mention that in our team in DG Energy, we're working on something called the Better Homes Partnership, which is really partnerships, plural, which is a way of doing exactly this, getting stakeholders together around flexibility for building renovation, around financing, around decarbonization of heating. So really to overcome more the organizational and logistics barriers. And for this, I think the social contracting is a very interesting way forward.
Definitely interesting, and connecting those dots in a system that is super complex is definitely something to take note of. Thank you very much. And moving on to Andrea, what are your views? Is there anything missing to make it ready for at-scale deployment?
Yeah, I think a lot has been said already. So, but there must be. I mean, ESCO models and ESCO social contracting models. It's not since yesterday. I mean, this has been existing for a very long time, and there must be a reason why it's not taking off much more fast and more broadly. And I think part of the reason is, I mean, the complexity, as was just described by Silvia. Then it's a lack of awareness and of education. People don't know how to deal with it. I think there's a big need for standardization, so that contracts are more standardized, so that they can be applied more easily and deployed more easily. There are also accounting problems. Into which budget does it fall, and who is responsible for what? Who takes the guarantee, as Silvia was saying? I think it's a beautiful model. It can potentially solve a lot of problems, but it requires more education of the involved market players and more standardization, I think, is my message.
And that encouragement piece to change something that is, working on the basis of inertia, of course, right, into something that is maybe unknown territory for some. And that is very interesting indeed. If we keep going along the line of chairs rather than the order of speaking. Oh no, surprise, what have I done? What have I done? What have I done? Shocking.
Now I'm awake again. No. Yes. Sorry. Yep.
Is the adrenaline helpful, or is the adrenaline worse, making it worse?
No. I was thinking from the perspective of the heat pump sector and the manufacturers. I think specifically the fact that it's tackling big, I think, either a whole street or quartier or a big building block, or that could also help with standardizing and with reducing costs, because it's larger scale at once. So I think that could also be beneficial to bring costs down if you do bigger renovation areas at once. So that's also, I think, a positive link there. We also had in the Netherlands this net zero, or what I don't remember exactly the name, but they did exactly that. So renovating whole neighborhoods. But in the Netherlands, you have this specific thing that their social housing, all the houses look exactly the same, which is not in Belgium, is a bit less the case, for example. Maybe in other countries this is, but that could be very beneficial, because then you can have the same heat pump just in many houses, which can help reducing costs. Then I was also thinking about the use of the social climate fund, of certain policy instruments. For that, what we really need is also stability in those instruments. So then we need to be able to count on them for a long time. So I think that's very crucial, that policymakers then commit and not have these stop-and-go policies, which we see are detrimental just also for the energy transition in general. So that's a crucial element. And then, linking it to also indeed this guarantee and who takes the risk. There's one aspect that also is currently being looked at, is this GBER, so the General Block Exemption Regulation, which arranges for which state aid measures member states do not have to ask a specific permission or notification to the Commission. And there currently aid can be given to energy service providers, but grants specifically are not mentioned. And it's important to allow those as well, because, for example, in the leasing model of a company, Termondo in Germany, we have seen that this has caused quite some issues, because for every subsidy for the end user, so for the heat pump end user, the end user had to apply for this themselves individually, and this increased a lot the costs and the complexity, so they had to adapt then their model, because they could not request all these subsidies at once, which would reduce their risk and would make it easier for them to offer this leasing model. So maybe this is also useful then in the case for social contracting, to have this adapted in the GBER, which is currently being done and being looked at by the Commission, and the proposal should come by the end of this year, I believe. So.
Thank you very much. Brilliantly done, given you were surprised by me throwing the questions here, so I apologize. But it's an interesting point as well, right, to sort of make the model work in a way that the administrative burden is also not too onerous, and in particular not onerous for individuals. If we talk about putting the consumer in the center, then it's a question of actually, not by way of procedure, putting barriers in place to accessing those funds. It's very interesting. Now, do I risk another adrenaline shock, or? Yeah, okay, he's ready. So Lorenz is ready.
So I don't know if it will work in a big scale. I think I'm not the right person to talk to there, but I can say it from a perspective of a heat supplier. We had some cases where we used like a general funding for heat pumps, and in those buildings it wasn't very necessary, because like the landlords and the tenants would have afforded the new installments of the heat pump, and there was no need for the funding. And I think with this social contracting you can share the money much more effective. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I see another. Go ahead, Rudiger.
Oh, well, it's great to sense huge support from your side, even though, but I take this shame that the maybe has won this contest before. It's on me. Sorry, I was not convincing enough, but it's not here a pitch game. It's glad. I am really glad that you give us feedback on this, because we're working on it since 2 years, and believe us, we have been grilled by consumers, by end consumers, by all these associations alongside that. And we have been in deep discussion with tenant associations back and forth, and it's necessary because, if we want to create a market, and this is the heating market, we need to have everybody on board in a really respectful way and in a really consistent way. So that's the way we try to do that. Because over the years I learned that it does not make sense to play the hardball game. It does not make any sense at this point. We need to have a kind of shared approach where we take those along. So I would not be here if I don't believe it would go. And I can say that we are already, as I mentioned before, if this is a 10-step approach, then we are in step 8 and 9 maybe, where we approach right now, come back to the government, come back to all the associations, say, okay, this is what we worked out together with your advice. It's not our brain work. It's just what we learned from you. So let's go. And we have sensed a huge support, and we're also glad to sense some of the support also here from your side. So let's move. That next time, maybe next year, you can say, oh, we have it. We made it, right? That would be great. So we're working on it.
All right.
I'm quite optimistic.
That's our goal for next year then 100% acceptance rate on the Slido at USEF. I will see you all back here next year. Minimum. Just to introduce another unexpected element, I believe Andrea has a question for you. Go ahead, Andrea.
Cause an adrenaline shock now to you, Rüdiger. No, it's actually, I was wondering, so if you don't have any strong driver anymore in Germany for landlords to replace their fossil fuel boilers, because the law is being changed right now. Can this social contracting address this somehow, you think?
That's the perfect. You know, when the soccer cup will now start, you have these passes. You know, the player's not already there, but the ball is already rolling there, and you just need to get quicker to pick it up and put it into the goal. I'm not a football fan, basically, or soccer fan, but it's a good picture for, I think. No, coming back to to the truth. This is basically, we have now the Building Modernization Act, which is replacing, not only from the title, the Building Energy Act. And we have witnessed today a very vivid discussion in the Bundestag in Berlin, where this proposal was really slapped. It was not well received on the broader part of the community and the member of parliaments. But without looking on that, by coincidence, it just happened, we have maybe a module which perfectly fits into a very weak spot of this Building Modernization Act, where it says, I don't want to bore you with paragraphs and things, but if a landlord is not capable to provide those renovations, there will be a loophole for him, a huge loophole, with lighting on the floor, with a soft carpet where nobody is hurt when he walks over it. So it will be a great loophole for everybody who is not willing to do anything. But from the discussion last 2 weeks, we learned, okay, this social contracting is something pretty smart because it enables landlords not willing, maybe not being able to do such kind of investments, to do them because they have not the first investment, and they have not to provide transparency on each of their tenants by supervising their incomes, have they lottery win or not, on everything. No, they don't. It's very simple. So it may just fit into this loophole and make it a bit smaller, which is good for all of us here, because it increases energy efficiency, it increases energy transition in a good way. So, but this was not intended. And I would assume that the Building Modernization Act was not designed to just fit on this, but maybe let's be optimistic. Let's stay optimistic.
A lucky turn of events, indeed. Okay, thank you very much. And now going for the last answer to our question about whether we have a viability for the social contract or not. To last but not least, Helene, sorry, we took a detour to get to you.
No worries.
But
thanks for repeating the question because I already forgot.
No worries.
But my short and simple answer is that it has to work. No, but I just want to say that something that Sylvia also already mentioned is that we have, for a long time, we have been sharing the costs already of the energy transition, of the climate transition, even though we're not really, like, it's not super apparent on our energy bills. We see that our energy bills are rising when we hit another fossil fuel price crisis. So we have been sharing a lot of the costs of the energy transition and the climate transition already. So it's really urgently the time to start sharing the benefits as well. And I think that models like this can really do that. And even more so, I think in combination with the idea of doing it collectively and through collectively owned initiatives, I think that can even improve the model, make them even more legitimate on a democratic base, make them even more accepted by people that are involved or affected by the measures that are being implemented, that there's also the opportunity to sit together around the table with all parties involved and have an honest discussion where everybody's talking to each other on an equal basis. I want to mention again that this is like the core element of what an energy community is, and that is that one member, one vote. It doesn't matter how much you were able to put into the energy community, how much you were able to invest. but you have an equal voice. And I think it's these types of models that are very valuable to empowering also the most vulnerable and those that have been disadvantaged in the energy system as we've known it and as we still know it. So yeah, in that regard, I really want to reiterate the fact that I hope these models work, and I would be happy to brainstorm on how we can combine them and collectively go for it.
Perfect. We are getting signaled to move to the Q&A, but thank you very much for that kind of rousing mission statement. And I think it must work, as you say. So moving on to a couple of questions from the audience. I believe they used to be on the screen. If they could come back to the screen, they are now back on the screen. Thank you very, very much to the people working in the background to make sure everything is working. We will very quickly take the top two questions. I think the first one for Rudiger directly. What you have described, is this already in place and functioning in the EU? Or is this only something that is being designed at the moment, so not yet operational? So would you clarify for our audience on that issue?
Yeah. I would not have dared to come up here with a panel saying, okay, we have something new, if this would be already operational somewhere. So no, it's not yet, but it does not keep us from going. So as I said, we want to report next year that it's working, but not yet. It's not yet.
Not yet, but as Helene said, it must work. It must work. So, okay, we can keep that in mind. Yeah.
It's the imperative.
Moving on to the next question. Assuming we agree that monitoring and control can reduce demand and help avoid oversized heating and cooling systems, what is stopping this from becoming a standard first step in renovation programs? Should this be anchored in financing criteria, EPCs, renovation passports, or EPBD guidance? Okay, so a pretty dense question. I think I could see potentially a few people on the panel attacking this. Does anyone have a sense of wanting to go first? Would you like to, Sylvia? Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. I think this is kind of already the case, and not necessarily in a renovation program. It's the case in everyday operation and maintenance, and it's anchored actually, indeed, in inspections that we have in the EPBD. We refer to it in guidance. There are, monitoring and control is already there in even before you unleash a big. I mean, it a little bit depends what you mean by renovation program, because there is renovation and renovation. You can go for the first step and then for a stage renovation, or for in one go deep renovation. But in any case, I do think that this is well integrated in the legal basis and also in everyday's practice. But maybe you see differently, Gust or Andrea.
Go ahead, Andrea. Yes, very briefly. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I can be very quick. In theory, yes. In practice, I'm not so sure, because there is a lot which is kind of which would open the door to do that, but then there is absolutely no obligation to act on it. So if you find in an audit, for example, XYZ is not working properly, or is oversized, or not maintained, or whatever, you can then make that statement, and then you can put it in your drawer and walk home. So I think there is a bit more need to act actually on those findings when you see something doesn't work properly, or is not sized properly, or whatever.
Yep. And to once again kind of engender that optimization we were talking about, and make sure that everything is the right size. Absolutely. For a final question, we go to Lorenz and to Rudiger again, very, very quickly. How do you ensure cost neutrality in terms of rent and bills? What are your views on the cost neutrality clause in the German heat supply law? Again, a big question, but if you can answer very briefly. I'll go to you first, Lorenz.
So at the moment there is the cost neutrality clause in the German law. What we have to do when we start a new project, we have to do we look at the costs they had before and the costs they have with us. So I think that's pretty clear. But with now the increased investment and stuff, it's in many cases not possible to be cost neutral. And I think there's work to do. I think Rüdiger knows better.
Yeah, actually, there's a discussion also going on into part 4 tomorrow in Berlin, especially on this cost neutrality. Of course, cost neutrality is necessary for the consumers not to be over surprised and have this kind of adrenaline looking at their bills and their heating bills. So this totally makes sense, but it does not make sense if you want to switch from a fossil fuel system with pricing and everything, and then look into a decarbonized heating system. And it seems to be that there is a kind of mental agreement so far, which has not been expressed in a kind of regulation, but hopefully will do so because it was a broad consent from most of the association from the consumer side and also from the heating market side. But of course, I assume there's still one half sentence on the cost neutrality. The idea of this social contract is, of course, we want to do this. Of course, we want to look on the vulnerable households and create this kind of cost neutrality with additional incentives provided by subsidy programs.
Thank you very much. Now, we're at the end of our time, and I do not want to keep you from your cocktails because I hear there's somewhere in the USEV space there are cocktails happening, so I know how important that is to you all. But just a few closing words from me. I think we are in a time where we've been shown by these recurring energy crises that we need to be thinking about new models. I think with this opportunity, in a way, in times of crisis, I think we can also really reimagine the way our communities look and our whole relationship to energy, which is something that Helene was nodding towards. I think this is an opportunity to connect the dots, as we've heard, to put consumers at the center of the equation, to really make sure that the social part of social policy or social contracting becomes the default in the way that we construct our cities and our relationship to our energy supply. So I think, please join me in thanking our panels and our panelists, rather, sorry, with a round of applause. They've been fantastic today. So. Thank you as well to those watching at home. I know it's not an easy task to last all the way until the end of the conference, so thank you again. And please let us know what you thought about this session. There will be one final question after we end. But I wish everyone a wonderful evening, a wonderful weekend when it comes. And yeah, let's keep social contracting in mind for the future. And 100% next year, 100% acceptance rate. No pressure. Thank you very much.